afternoon I'm going to talk to you about aligning the capability with your organisation and the demands it puts upon you and how you might go about it. First of all, have you all got voting buttons? I just want to ask a few simple questions. The first of all, that hackneyed phrase, people are our best asset, greatest asset. How many people have heard that phrase? Can you all please vote now? Right, I'll close the polling now. That's a good return. Not unexpected in this audience. Next question. In your own organisations, how many of those organisations actually claim that people are their greatest asset? All vote now, please. Okay, I'll close the polling now. Ah, interesting. Third question. Does your organisation actually live that claim? All vote now, please. Right, I'll close the polling now. I don't think I have to say any more at that point, do I? Okay. But that's not unremarkable. Most organisations say it, but don't actually deliver on it. So, the question is, can you actually afford to ignore that valued asset? What's the impact on your business of ignoring it? More about that shortly. So, what am I going to talk about? First of all, the context. Flagship, I'll talk a bit about Flagship, the change environment in which we're operating in and the program that I'm driving forward, capability and how we've gone about managing our capability, the benefits we've seen from it, and the future for us. So I suspect most of you are unaware of who Flagship is, but it's a company that was formed in 1996 to service the Royal Navy's training command. It's grown now to a £130 million business, 1,600 employees, servicing a military and maritime training environment with full construction services and FM behind it. We operate out of Portsmouth, and we HQ and 5 geographic offices. The challenge for us, though, is that we've set ourselves a 50% growth target over the next 4 years. Why the next 4 years? Because this long-term arrangement we have with the Navy comes to an end in 2011. Our whole raison d'etre is to capitalise on the assets the Navy have for commercial growth and advantage. That said, we service many overseas and foreign navies. We have further opportunity with the amount of restructuring that's going on within our own Navy. And last but not least, whereas we used to have joint parentage between BAE and Vosper Thornycroft, or VT as it's now known, VT now become our sole parent very shortly. That is also a significant challenge for us. So change. Change is all about creating a successful environment that's aligned with your strategic intent, the vision for your company. That change environment is made of 3 aspects, 3 intrinsically linked elements. That's about the process, the way in which you deliver your service to the client, the way you control your business, the culture, the way you behave to one another, to your supply chain, to your client base, and last but not least, the capability, that which you deliver that service to the organisation. If you think about it, you can't unpack any one of those and not address the other issues. We've all seen processes that are actually so bureaucratic, they drive a certain kind of culture into the organisation. It becomes very rule-based. Equally so, why, if you're a competent subject matter expert, do you need highly detailed processes? You should have processes that recognise the competency of your organisation. And that's why I say, if you do any form of transformation, you cannot pick on any one of those in isolation. They have to all work together in harmony. So the challenge for us, and probably most organisations, it's quite easy to appoint people with capability to a role and a task and a delivery of a service. We all come with a set of skills, whether they be through life, whether they be educated skills. From that, we turn that into a capability by which we deliver the service to the client. Where most organisations start to fail is recognising what's my strategic intent for this business and what is the offering that I actually want to take to the market, both in the capability that I have and what is the market actually going to buy from me. And that's where most people fail, aligning their capability with the offering. And as we live in the world we do with faster and faster growth and pace of change, it's about keeping that capability aligned with that offering. Oops. And then when we talk about capability, I mean, how many of us think that when our staff walk through the door in the morning, they actually leave half of what they are behind? They come in, they're employed to do a role, they have a certain capability that's expected of them, but they're just leaving behind this innate life skill, all the other competencies they've picked up in life, and the organisation just fails to capitalise on that. And all you're doing is asking them to deliver a service. That is clearly not maximising the benefit of our staff or our employees. They are becoming potentially disenfranchised. The organisation is certainly not capitalising on the assets that they have. So the challenge that we all face is moving that waterline down so that we can capitalise on that capability that our staff actually have. You then start to think about stress. And we all know the story that high stress, burnout, and that's not where you're at. The equal and opposite, though, is if you're not capitalising on the assets of people, they become lethargic, unengaged. They're not optimally delivering to the benefit of themselves or the organisation. So what you're trying to aim for is this optimum. We all like a certain acceptable level of stress in our lives, because it puts us on the edge, it makes us think, it makes us be more creative. It's looking about innovation. So what we need to make our capability capable of is just working in that optimum level, whatever is relevant for them. Question. You can all look at your own organisations and you think you can recognise the star players in that organisation, those people that absolutely always overperform. You can then start to look at the good employees. And there are some statistics around that say that typically, 70-odd% of your organisation or approaching that are going to be good or star employees. What about the ones that are less engaged or totally and wholly unengaged with the organisation? There's a penalty at that point. And that comes back to the point I questioned earlier on. Can you afford to ignore that capability in the management of it? And just if you take an example of a medium-sized organisation, typical cost of employment, 28k, say, that unengaged level of staff is going to be costing you, potentially, another £2 million worth of cost into your business. You're having to recruit and underpin those underperformers with more staff to deliver the service. How many of you have ever actually thought about the cost those staff aren't performing and supporting your business? So, the challenge for us, if you only uplifted 20% of the capability of your organisation and moving people up a level from where they are, and it might be no more than capitalising on their capability, giving them the learning and development that they require, asking them to challenge themselves, the innovation, and you could be making significant savings for your business. So the answer is no, you can't afford not to invest in that capability, because if you don't, you're costing your business. For us, the requirement on capability was about understanding the gap between the business that we're in and the capability that we're servicing it with. How can we ensure that we get the best utilisation of those staff? We are very much geographically separate, and some of our functions and departments are singletons, maybe 2 or 3 people. Classically, we were seeing people going to their local friend for help and support, and therefore you ended up with generalists trying to do specialist work, recipe for disaster. We were clearly, if we didn't understand the capability we had, not getting best commercial opportunity or advantage from it. Training. How often have you seen people come and demand training that sounds absolutely right for them, but actually, is it adding value to the business? Again, the norm for industry says that 30% of your training budget is wasted on good idea training, but doesn't actually add any value to the business. And last and certainly not least, is actually how do you give the staff career path visibility, and how do you give them opportunity that may actually be going away from where their core employment is into other areas and opportunities. With Inside Flagship, we have a framework of competencies, core competencies, the classic things about innovation, about communication, about teamwork. Something's missing. We didn't actually capture the technical skills of our staff to deliver the service that they were addressing. So how could you possibly understand whether you had the right capability to deliver the services? As I said earlier on, we're a training FM construction, so that's what you'd expect to see, frameworks around, sorry, I do keep pressing the wrong button, around training and construction, project management, and the professional support group functions, finance, commercial, business winning. Quite clearly, they were missing in the organisation. I just want to talk about the other levers that are in the environment. We all talk about having a world-class company. And for us that meant, and I'll come on to it again shortly, about having a constructive culture. And I'll tell you what I mean by that shortly. And that's all about having a set of company values that we all understand, that actually the clients that we operate with supports their values, that we actually communicate to our staff, and every member of staff knows the part that they play in the strategic vision of the organisation, the competence of the organisation to deliver that, and that we have effective and efficient processes that underpin it. And again, not least, that creativity. People are our answer to our future. So what do we do? How do we measure the culture of the organisation? This is a product from Human Synergistics we use. It's been around for about 30 years now, and it's been recognised across the globe. It's in 3 segments, and each of those segments has another subset. But it's Maslow's hierarchy, recognition at the bottom, security needs to self-actualisation at the top, the people focus on the right-hand side, and more about the task orientation on the left-hand side. And it's a normative test. This black line round here is that normative profile. So you'd actually look at it and say, Flagship looks fairly normal. But actually, when you start to see it, there are some pieces that poke out. Oppositional behaviour. It's okay to challenge. Yes, it is okay to challenge. You all want challenge in organisation, but you only want it to an acceptable level. Then you start to look over here about being conventional. And again, that sits out. You say, great, conventional. It means everybody fits in, everybody knows their place. It's one unified entity. Well, actually, there is an opposite to being conventional. There is the adverse. Example, meetings. It's okay to turn up 5 minutes late to a meeting. Well, everybody else does it. I'll do it. I'll fit in. So there is a negative to the conventional at that point. And if you then take the conventional with the oppositional, you then turn around saying, so it's okay to challenge, even if it's not right or appropriate. I can, because that's the convention of the organisation. That's beginning to construct a fairly hostile environment for some people. So that's the current state. Then you want to start looking at the future state. And that future state is in this very, very constructive environment, which is what I talked about earlier on. But you still do want some of these other behaviours, because though you want people to be free-thinking, achievement, self-empowered, they do need to operate in some level of control. That's the profile that we as a business described we wanted. Then you ask yourself, fine, but is that actually the profile for a service-based organisation? And the answer is yes, if you look at the information that Human Synergistics has on service-based organisations. And achieving that more constructive environment, you're actually enabling people to be self-fulfilled, that they recognise the contribution that they make to an organisation, that they're valued, and they are valued members of an organisation. If you don't, then quite clearly you're not getting the best out of your capability, it's not matched to your requirement, innovation will not be there, it will be stifled. The company will probably fail to achieve its desires and objectives, and not least, your customer is not going to have a good experience. Process. Here we have a typical process. All these little yellow post-its represent a step in a process, which is represented here in what's known as a handoff diagram. Every one of the points where a line intersects that circumference is a point where information is transferred, which means that at every one of those points there is a potential for misinformation or misinterpretation. It's a crazy process. I mean, most processes are never designed on day one to become draconian, but over time, as organisations grow, they do. They begin to become constrained. Nobody ever goes to fix them. They usually either put a band-aid over them, or at worst, they just become a monster. They clearly drive frustration and paralysis into a business. And it's about recognising your processes and the capability and aligning them. When you look at processes, and the approach we've taken is using the lean methodology, is that actually in most processes that we undertake, only 5% is added value. And by that I mean that's what the client wants. When you go into a shop and buy one of those, all you're interested in is that. You're not interested in the process that actually obtained the raw material, processed it, stored it, transported it, painted it, whatever. And that's what I mean by 95% non-value added. There are some processes in that you have to do. But the bit the client wants is just to be able to walk in the shop and buy one of those. So, how did we go about implementing our capability management system? First of all, we looked at it in 3 stages. Day one, we weren't actually sure whether it was actually going to give us the output, the requirement that we desired. So we undertook a pilot study, or a study, and it worked for us. We then looked at undertaking a pilot, and for us, training was both a relatively new area, in the sense that it was rapidly growing for us, and where the biggest risk and where the biggest returns and benefits were for us. And for us, training means about planning the training, designing the courses, the instruction, and the accreditation of those courses. We took frameworks from ITG and developed them accordingly for our needs. We then took it to about 200 of our staff, and they did self-assessment, and you could see the gaps between it and the actual requirement. That was so successful, we've now taken it to the full training organisation, and that's about 1/3 of our organisation. And at the same time, project management, we believed we had a level of weakness, so we've included that. So we've now, within 18 months, captured the capability of about half of our organisation, and we now understand the gap between what we need and what we've got. We went about it by, as I said just now, about the frameworks, understanding the core competencies that are required, the management competencies, your technical skills to deliver your role, and finally for us, system. And by system, I mean, in our context, whether it be a sonar system or a warfare system, because it's very specific to our requirements. But quite crucially, what we wanted to do was to capture the personal skills of all of our staff, because this is the part where you're starting to add value back into an organisation that's not capitalised on to actually do the role that you're employed to do. You then go through a level of self-assessment, management verification, and then you can do the analysis on the variation. So what does that look like? Here's a typical example. You've got a specific role against an instructor, and he's at a practitioner level. So these are the competencies that are required for the individual, And these are the profiles that are required, each of those. So for each one of these skill levels, there are 4 defined levels. And if I just take this one specific example for desktop tools, then when you go to your assessment, we've described the competencies required for each of those levels so that you can measure yourself and assess yourself against it. And we believe we've come up with quite a smart set of definitions. So it's very easy to see at what level of competency that you're at. That then means that you can see the dark blue box is the required level, and the dark blue box is where you are, and the shaded in box is where you need to be. So you can see that there's some variations over and under at that point. You can then start to look at the performance of a group, and you can see where people, or where there are lack of capability within your own group and your own organisation, so you can start to think about prioritising where you need to focus your attention. I think the most powerful part, though, is actually when you look at it from an organisational perspective, and you start to look at the competencies that you have in an organisation, and as to whether that actually meets the desires and needs of your organisation. So if you just take an example down here, defence and political studies, quite a core part of what we do and what we train in. That, if it's core to our business and I've only got one person that's become a subject matter expert, that is a weakness or risk to my business. So I would then have to go about doing something about it. But this now said, you can now start to use this to undertake your succession planning and your talent management with. You've now got a structured basis on which to make those decisions. The benefits. All the benefits we set out to achieve, we've achieved. The hard benefits, quite interesting, because with a lot of these systems you tend to say, am I actually going to see a return on investment for myself? I've taken it over the 4 years, in other words, to the end of the contract that we have with the Navy. And yes, just purely on the operating and running costs of the system, I can see over 400% return on investment. So that's making the annual assessment of our staff easier, as opposed to the mandrolic systems that we have today that were ineffective and didn't meet the needs of the business. What it doesn't include is the improved performance of the business and actually the commercial opportunity and growth that it's given us the opportunity to exploit. For us, the future, we'll take it into the management area, and we're actually just starting to look at using the Cranfield management structure and operating that. The interesting thing is going to be is whether Cranfield actually fits our business today or whether it's an aspiration. Information systems, there are frameworks, the Sophia framework to support that. The interesting one is going to be around service provision. You can expect technically competent people to self-assess readily, but when I talk about service provision, that's people in our life, in arboricultural background, people that maintain the grounds, etc. That's going to be an interesting challenge about how we capture our competency in those areas. What we've achieved so far, though, is just understand our capability and not the availability. That will be the next challenge for us. And finally, especially in a training context, this has given us a significant opportunity to take a consultancy piece back into future clients at that point. So it's not only servicing our needs, it's giving us an offering in its own right. We'll have questions in a second. And yes, just acknowledgements.
Thanks very much indeed. A very
excellent
presentation and very thoughtful. Thank you.